Hi, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Byword Show. So glad you're here today. I am really, really excited about this episode. I'm excited to introduce you guys to Melissa Johnson. You guys, I've been following along with her for a little bit and just hearing her story. And now she's got this book coming out. I just think this is going to be such a cool and timely and needed conversation. So, Melissa, first of all, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Hannah. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yes, I can't wait. Well, for those who don't know you yet, would you just kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I do a couple different things. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist up here in Minnesota. And so I spend part of my time seeing clients through a private practice up here. I also teach at Bethel University. I'm an adjunct professor. So I'm actually, with the book coming out this semester, I'm not teaching, but I'll be back there in the fall teaching a class called Introduction to Wellbeing. So it's a class
Mm,
essentially on soul well-being. I'm a
I
certified
love
spiritual
that.
director as well, but I'm not doing much with that at this moment. Though I do think that that is a part of like my worldview and how I integrate spirituality and faith into everything that I do. And then I also host a podcast and blog called Impossible Beauty, which is all about redefining beauty as the life of God at work in us and among us. And then finally, I'm a new author. I have my book coming out on June 6th called Soul Deep Beauty, Fighting for Our True Worth in a World Demanding Flawless. And so that is what I'm spending a lot of my time on currently.
Wow. So many things and all amazing. I'm just like astounded by you. This is so cool. It's got
Mm.
to be so interesting too with your therapy background
Yeah.
and the well being world.
Mm.
And then also, you've got this passion for beauty. So, how did all of that come about? How did you get so passionate about beauty?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it was not like a part of my journey that I anticipated or even like desired initially. So when I was seeing clients about probably like 9 years ago now, and I was also seeing my own personal therapist, and it came to my attention via my therapist that I should be getting, or not should be getting. She invited me to get some more intentional help around what she was calling an eating disorder. And I was
Mm,
kind of shocked by that because I felt that a lot of the things I was doing seemed, quote, healthy because of our culture. And what I ended up realizing that there was something kind of out of whack in my life. And so I did end up doing intensive eating disorder treatment. And through that journey, I ended up seeing like the unhelpful messages that women and men actually were believing in the therapy rooms in intensive eating disorder treatment were actually the same messages that people were believing outside of the therapy rooms. I
mm,
saw how the souls within the eating disorder therapy world were being depleted because of these messages, but I saw the same thing happening in the outside world. And so I got to this point where I realized just how those messages had been like sucking the life from my own experience. And again, just seeing it in those same messages at work in the wider world, and just realize like I can't like not say something about this.
mm.
And so from that, it's kind of this is already kind of a long story, but a longer story about how that developed into Impossible Beauty, the podcast, and needing to redefine beauty, and then what is now the book as well.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so funny that you mentioned that because I had an eating disorder as well when I
Mhm.
was younger. And
Mm.
it's so funny that you mentioned how you didn't even realize that
Yes.
you wouldn't have even identified yourself as someone who was struggling with that because it was the same for me. I always
Mm.
saw, these documentaries or these pictures of girls with really severe cases. And I thought, oh, no, like, it's not that bad for me. Like, I'm just doing what the internet says I need to do to be pretty and healthy and thin and fit or whatever. And I mean, I was 12. I mean, I was just looking at these messages and receiving them as like, oh, yeah,
Mm.
this is just what I need to do in order to be beautiful, in order to be accepted. And it's just crazy how ingrained that messaging is into our culture that you and I and so many others could just feel like, oh, that's normal. Like, oh, there's nothing even wrong with that, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I do think that there are a number of misunderstandings about eating disorders as well. Because I think same with you. Like I grew up seeing, yeah, whether it's a documentary or a like, I remember there's like one TV, made for TV movie drama or something about Tracy Gold. I don't know if you're if you're old enough to remember that show, but like, probably not. She was in Growing Pains, an older show. Um, but just this idea, this like caricatured idea of someone being emaciated. But what a lot of people don't know is that you can have an eating disorder in any size or shape body, in any
Right.
gender, any age. And I think sometimes we have this idea that you have to be 14 and Caucasian and upper middle class, or and those things are just not true. And
Right.
so I think oftentimes it gets, I mean, there are a number of reasons. I think people don't realize it's an issue because of our like how normalized it is in our culture, some of these struggles, but also and beliefs, but also because I think of that caricature that we have oftentimes of that teen girl
Yeah.
with an eating disorder.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, along with that, you did mention that we are just believing these lies, men and women, kids, any age, it doesn't matter what your race is, what your background is. As part of American culture, we are receiving these messages every day, pretty much everywhere we look. So, what are these lies that you've noticed we are receiving about beauty and all these standards, and how is it impacting us?
Yeah, and there's so many messages, Hannah. I think that because that's such a good. I mean, it's such a good question. I think one of the biggest things that I've experienced in my own life is the impact of um, like thinness as
Mm.
like our representation for beauty and for health. And so I think that we have like a double whammy there, kind of when it comes to uh, like almost like losing weight being the linchpin for social acceptance, happiness, health.
Mm,
I mean, we just put so much emphasis on weight loss as the key, like the silver bullet, so to speak.
yep.
And so I think that is one thing that I see. Another thing is what Jean Kilborn, who's an activist, and she has been researching like advertising for literally decades. She talks about this idea of absolute flawlessness. And that
Mm,
was true, I would say, in print ads in the 90s. When I grew up and would look at magazines and things like that, we had photoshopping, and that those technologies are, clearly still around and at work. But also, I think what has made this idea of absolute flawlessness being the norm even worse is obviously social media, where it's not only celebrities who have been photoshopped, but it is our friends and our own
right.
image, that is like these images are literally unreal. And so then we go and compare ourselves or look at ourselves in the mirror, and it's like a almost, I don't know how it can't be a trigger for shame. This idea of like I am not. My skin maybe isn't as flawless as that literally cartoon version of myself.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like it's kind of laughable. It's like when we actually talk about it that way, but then our brains don't realize that we're comparing ourselves to a fake image. And so those are a couple of the things that I see. And well, so kind of going back to that thin ideal, we see like, so there's one survey that occurred where I think it was like Glamour magazine that did it in partnership with Chapel Hill, that in this survey 97% of the women recognized having a one I hate my body moment during the day. And so we're seeing epidemic numbers of body dissatisfaction. I would also
Mm,
say that, I think post pandemic and also during the pandemic, we see the prevalency of eating disorders going up. We also see disordered eating. And another survey, 75% of the women surveyed reported that they engaged in disordered eating behaviors. And I think kind of to the same point that we were naming earlier in our conversation, that I think oftentimes these reports that we have of disordered eating and eating disorders are only because if we recognize it, we can only report it if it's
right.
recognized. But in both your case and my case, and I actually just released an interview on my podcast Impossible Beauty of another woman who had an eating disorder and did not know it. And so
Mm,
I'm curious, like I'm so curious actually, how many people actually are engaging in disordered eating or eating disorders would be diagnosable, if we maybe I don't, if we only realized it. So
yeah.
those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Gosh, there's so much to that because I'm just thinking, yes, I've experienced so much of that, whether it's like feeling like I need to lose the weight, feeling like my skin doesn't look as good. I mean, I remember a couple years ago seeing this really big influencer talk about how she was taking a break from using filters on her Instagram stories because she just realized how much that impacted her mental health whenever her real face didn't look as pretty as the filtered face. And I was like, things as simple as that are impacting our well-being.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing to me. And it's just crazy that that's the world we live in right now. I
Yes.
remember, you guys know that I'm part of the ARI family. And as part of that community, we did a training with NEDA, the National Eating Disorders Association, about beauty standards at the
Mm.
beginning of last year. And they shared the statistic that something like only 4% of women actually believe they are beautiful. And that was shocking to me. But to your point, I was like, well, that's only the women they recorded because I probably would have answered no on a on a random day,
Mm.
and so it's like, I can't believe this is our normal. I can't believe that these are the standards, these impossible standards that media, social media especially, like you mentioned, and then advertising, all of this retouching is telling us, like, that's the standard. And I've seen, and I've talked with so many women, I'm sure you have as well, but how that impacts our mental health is crazy. So I'm sure for you, being in this beauty conversation and then also the mental health world as a therapist, like, how do you see the two connected?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to your point, they're so connected, and the research shows us this. We see things like body dissatisfaction, eating disorders, anxiety, low self esteem, body dysmorphia, and so the list kind of goes on. And then I keep quoting this quote or this study, the latest CDC report, but I really need to look it up. But it was just horrendous, like the statistics, like the around like female, like adolescent mental health, how much it has like I'm trying to remember if it was like depressive mood or anxiety, but the measures have just drastically worsened like in the last couple of years. And
Mm,
I can't help but ask myself, like, why is that? And I've talked to a couple different people on my podcast, and one was so bold to say, like, how could it not be social media? And
mm,
I only hesitate to say that because that we don't have research saying for sure this is
right.
causality. um, but I think that I think we could probably make put some like theories in the mix about how could social media not be impacting our mental health. And then I think for me, like anecdotally, I can say, like in sessions and things like that, of course I've spoken with a number of women who struggle with body image and their relationship with food. I think that is an ongoing theme oftentimes for the women that I work with.
Mm, I could totally see that. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's it's so interesting to me, especially now that I'm a mom, and especially
Mm.
because I'm about to have a girl. Having a daughter is almost a little scary to me because I'm like,
Mm.
how do I protect her or help her navigate all of this? It's like, I feel like I don't even know how sometimes. It's just so much to carry. And especially with the addition to social media being such a huge part of our lives on a regular basis, it's something I am still learning. How do I protect myself? How do I limit the voices and kind of proactively help myself with my mental health or comparison or all of those things? Because it's like, so easy. I feel like it's just so easy for especially young girls, high schoolers, junior high. I mean, the time that I was struggling with all those things, social media wasn't even that big as it is now. So I can't even imagine like these young girls what they're navigating through. So, do you have any advice for how, I mean, a woman of any age, but especially someone who's active in the social media world, can kind of guard our hearts, guard our minds from all of those messages that can be overwhelming and impact us negatively?
Yeah, I think I have a couple like like tangible things and then some like theoretical things as well. The first thing is, I really think limiting use of social media is really key. Elena Rossini, who's a filmmaker, Italian filmmaker, I just had her on the podcast recently, and she, in her film The Illusionist, she talks about there's this estimate. This was like made in 2015, 2016, but at that time they were estimating that by 2020 we would be to the point of media saturation, where we are spending 80% of our waking hours on some kind of media. I spoke
Mm,
with Elena just several weeks ago, and she said, I think we're past 80%. Like, I think we've gone over. And so, my point in saying that is we are like, we're at that point of media saturation where our minds and our hearts are being soaked, drenched in these literally unreal images. And,
mm,
I think we like to, we can maybe pretend that that's not impacting us. But another piece of information that Jean Kilborn gives us is that babies can recognize a logo at the age of 6 months. So these images impact us deeply.
mm,
And so the reason I say that is because I think we sometimes don't recognize how much this is impacting our hearts and our minds. And so my first thought is let's limit the use. And I think about this. We don't have kids at this moment. That might be happening in the future. And so I think about, okay, well, I really don't want them to be using social media at all. And so I'm like, that maybe that's like naive of me to say, but how, how can we put around like guardrails and boundaries around phone usage and social media, and maybe
mm,
I actually, one of my students, she was, so she'd be like 18 or 19, and she was the only student in this one particular class because we were talking about social media. She had not had social media, and her her perspective was so interesting, and
hmm,
she actually didn't mind. I mean, maybe there were points at her in her life that she did mind, but at that point, she reported to me that she was super grateful that her parents had not allowed her
mm,
to have social media because she could see all of the drama it had caused her peers. So one idea is just really to be mindful about limiting social media. I think also limiting who we follow. I think that the when we think about advertising, there is a message that advertisers are trying to get across, and oftentimes they're trying to elicit insecurity or shame. And so I think having some media literacy around what is the message, well, actually more so, what is the emotion they're wanting me to feel so that I will
mm,
buy this product. There is an agenda to advertising, and so much of social media and influencing has, advertising baked into it. And so what is this fitness influencer wanting me to believe about this supplement? And usually it is, we can look at how the influencer, like how what they look like, and usually they will align with popular beauty ideals. And so
right.
the idea is that if I have this supplement, my body will look like this person's. And so I think just being critical, having a critical eye when we look at media and advertising to see what is the agenda here, what are they trying to sell me, what emotion are they trying to elicit, and instead of being kind of caught up in the emotional matrix of that particular advertisement. And so I think also diversifying our feeds. So instead of maybe
Mm,
having, again, following like all fitness influencers, maybe I would actually recommend like maybe don't follow any fitness influencers, because usually they have high numbers, and again they're trying to sell something, or at least have some kind of commercial element to their feed. Um,
right.
Also, I think maybe following different body shapes and sizes. Um, I think that can be really helpful. The last thing I'll say about this is more of that theoretical piece that I mentioned, and that is I would invite people to redefine beauty. And I think that can sound really like, I don't know, maybe cheesy or something. But the reason why it's so important is because I think what we believe about beauty really matters. Because ultimately, I think we are, as women in particular, we are shooting for beauty. I think
Yep.
that's in us. And when we are defining beauty by culture's stand or societal standards, it's going to be a perpetual race to nowhere, because
Mm,
we're never going to be that flawless fake version, because we aren't fake, we aren't plastic. But also, like, why would we want that? So Dr. Hilary McBride talks about this idea of burning down culture's standards of beauty. And actually, I've just been thinking about that and how powerful that is, like burning it down, like not assessing ourselves or our worth by societal views of beauty at all, but totally redefining the whole thing. And so
Mm.
that's why I have, in my book, I redefine beauty, and on the podcast as the life of God at work in us and among us. And so that is the kind of beauty that I am trying to spend my head and my heart energy in the midst of, because it's ultimately that kind of beauty that is going to bring about the thriving and the well-being that my soul
Mm.
longs for.
That's amazing. I love that. That's such a good point about just redefining it. Because I feel like it's one thing to try to fight the standards or go your own way. But if you really don't know what exactly the standard that you're looking for is, it's like you said, it's impossible. It's a race to nowhere. We're never going to be fulfilled. It's never going to be enough. And so for you, even in your own journey, I mean, you were going to see a therapist with your eating disorders, and then now you've gone on this long journey where you're helping others and you've written this book. What does it look like practically for you playing out that redefining of beauty in your own life?
Yeah. So I think I've been trying to just spend more energy thinking about that kind of beauty. Can I just say one more thing about the cultural beauty? Because I
Yes,
think this is
please.
okay, and then I will talk more about the with how I play that out. Um, because I think sometimes it can be so hard to walk away from culture's beauty standards. And what I really want myself to continue to see and invite listeners to see and readers to see how that broken brand of beauty is not good for us and there is an agenda. And so the agenda
Mm.
is basically to make money off of our shame. And so I want to go ahead and
Wow.
just call out this quote by Paul Hamburg, who's an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He says this: the media markets desire, and by reproducing ideals that are absurdly out of line with what real bodies really do look like, the media perpetuates a market for frustration and disappointment. Its customers will never disappear.
Mm.
So I want to call out the agenda of, I would say, advertisers, of corporations, of diet culture, to just to show that they are literally trying to profit off of our shame. And I want to call that out so that I think it makes it easier to turn against it and to burn down that idea, because again, it's just not good for us. Um, and it's feeding into, I think, powers that are purposefully playing us. But then back to your question of how does that play out in my own life? One thing that honestly has been really key in my life is this conversation I'm having on the podcast at Impossible Beauty. I started to just wonder. So I don't like, I was realizing toward the end of my treatment journey, like, I actually don't think that this is beauty, because it's actually not
Mm.
beautiful. Like what it's provide, or like what the fruits of it are not beautiful. The fruits of it do not bring life in the way that I think, for me, faith is a really big thing. So when I think about life and generativity, the fruits of cultural beauty are not beautiful. And so I started to think, like, what is beauty then? And so on the podcast, I talk to people about a number of things, kind of about their projects that are related to these topics, but also I ask every guest, how do you define beauty? And so
Mm.
when I think about beauty again as the life of God at work in us and among us, is my own definition. Sometimes I like to think about it in terms of like, um, like a multifaceted gem, and sometimes the Hebrew scriptures are described as this as well. Um, and so I have to say that that's where I'm borrowing this from. But when we think about beauty and like the life of God at work in us and among us as like this multifaceted gem, like we all in our own journeys have experienced the life of God at work in our lives. And so
Mm.
when I ask people that question of how they define beauty, another way I would translate that in my own mind is like, how have you experienced God's life at work in your story or in your experiences? And so having that conversation week in and week out really has started to rewire my brain. And what we know
Mm.
about neurobiology is what fires together wires together. So again,
Yes.
instead of swiping and looking at all these images of fake beauty and fake images, essentially, I am trying to spend more of my head and heart space and time on contemplating this like wild beauty that is actually true and that is actually eternal.
Wow, I love that so much. That's really cool. And I think that's such an interesting and perfect perspective. Like just looking at it, not so much as like, oh, appearance wise, what makes me beautiful according to the world, what I wear, how my skin looks, how my hair looks, how
Mm,
my makeup looks, what my body shape is, and shifting that off of ourselves. Cause I mean, that's a heavy weight to carry. Like leaving it up to us to meet these impossible standards. It's just always empty. We're always going to end up frustrated and just it's an endless cycle. But shifting the focus of beauty off of ourselves and onto God is so freeing. And that's just so like that's where we get the fulfillment we're looking for. So I
mm,
love that you're having that conversation and that you're asking people to think for
mm,
themselves, what does beauty mean to you? What does it look
mm,
like for you? And
mm,
how can you notice God's beauty at work in your own life? That is amazing. So with
mm,
that being said, talk to us about the book, Soul
mm.
Deep Beauty. What was the heart behind writing this? And what do you really want the readers to hear from this book?
The book again kind of came from, well, not kind of, it totally came from my journey in intensive eating disorder treatment. And so during the day, I would go to treatment. And then in the evenings, I was actually pursuing an additional degree in spiritual formation. So in the evenings, I would read about like the mystics and like Christian mystics and how they experience God's love and shame and grace were some additional classes I took. And so that experience, again, kind of shaped my ideas about beauty, but also opened my eyes to everything we've been talking about so far. And I kind of was awakened to this broken brand of beauty and its depleting effects, and how I think it's just the water we swim in. And so I just really
Mm,
hadn't questioned it that much. Like, probably if someone had asked me, do you think beauty standards are helpful? I probably would have been like, no, probably not. But I didn't realize like the layers of impact, but also the depth of impact. And so
mm,
that awakening to how damaging these messages are was the inspiration, as well as uh, like about 3/4 of the way through my experience, I think I started to see, or I know I started to see, how I think like evil has an agenda in the world, and I started to see how these messages were, I feel, being used by evil. And we could talk about like how, and I don't want to. I'm not like a person who thinks that there's like a demon behind every bush. I'm really
yeah.
not. But I really do. I've just seen too much in my experience to not think that there is like good and light in the world and dark and evil, whatever that means. I don't know all the, the ins and outs of it.
Hmm.
But I think that so Dr. Kurt Thompson talks about how shame is a minion of evil. And I started to see how I think not only are we being played by corporations and advertisers, but I really do think that evil is using the shame that all of this produces to distract us and disintegrate us and deplete us for the purpose of, if we are misguided and misdirected in these ways, what a perfect strategy
Mm,
to take our heart space and our head space and our energies and our talents, to redirect it toward something that is fleeting and false, so that we actually don't walk into the fullness of life, but also the fullness of who God has created us to be, so we can create good and beautiful things in the world. And so
wow.
that just made me so, I guess, angry, but I think in a good way, and energized to really uh, invite other people to become aware of this, but also to, I mean, become aware of broken beauty, but also become aware of this invitation to true beauty, where I feel like we really engage the fullness of life that God invites us
Mm.
into.
Oh, that's so good. Wow,
Mm.
that's amazing. I, for one, cannot wait to get my hands on this book. I'm so excited. I really agree with you. I definitely think that getting so focused on trying to be enough, trying to be
Mm.
beautiful, trying to be accepted, trying to reach whatever standard it is that we're striving for it is such a distraction. We wind up burnt out. I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it for so many other women. We get exhausted, we get frustrated, and we end up ineffective. Like we spend so much time and energy and focus trying to measure up that we don't even have anything else left to give when we're showing up for our purpose, when we're showing up for our families and relationships. Like it just totally wipes us out. And I can absolutely see the enemy at work there, just taking advantage of us. And it's like, if we start giving into these messages, we're really doing the work for him, like it's
Mm.
so sneaky. And I hate that so many women, I mean, myself included, I still fall into it all the time. It's like I fall for the trap of, oh, I need this in order to be more beautiful. I need this in order to be more worthy. I need this to be happier. And it's just lies. It's just totally lies. And so I think it's amazing what you're doing to, first of all, call out the lie, but also
Mm.
then equip women with the tools that they need to redefine beauty and even what it is we're striving for, what it is we're aiming for, like helping us better direct our attention and energy to focus on the goodness of God in our lives and let all the rest of it go. So, yeah, I really, really am grateful for what you're doing. And I think this book is going to help so many women as well as your podcast, too. But I'm curious before we go, if you were sitting across from a woman right now who is just
Mm.
really struggling to feel beautiful, struggling to feel like she's enough, what would you say to her?
Well, I think the first thing is I just really want to, like, I would want to offer them self compassion, an invitation to self compassion, because I think sometimes, and I know this happened for me, it would actually drive me nuts when people would be like, I don't know, these struggles with body image or whatever, this is like an idol and blah, blah. Like, to me, that just adds on shame. And so
Mm.
I don't think it's helpful. And so I would say that I would invite them to a compassionate stance toward themselves and toward all of us as women. I really think advertisers and corporations, they've used psychology to turn beauty against us. And so my hope is that that person would not feel shame for kind of feeding into some of these messages. Cause I really feel like, again, this is the water we swim in. And so hopefully lifting that a little bit. But then I'd also just invite them to just notice this as like an invitation. Because I think as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about the different energies. Because I think like cultural beauty, societal beauty causes us to strive and like keep going for it,
Yeah.
keep running after it. And then the other kind of pursuit of beauty, pursuing seeing the life of God at work in us and among us, just feels restful and invitational to me.
Mm.
And it also just recognizes like it's already there. Like the image of God is like already in you. And the vibrancy, like the glory, and I don't even understand all of this, but like the spirit of the living God is like in us. And that
Yeah.
is like stunning and that is eternal. And like in the end, everything else is going to fade away. I don't know what's going to happen. Whenever like for at the end of whatever this is, like this era or however you want to call it. But beauty standards are fleeting. They come and go with different times and um, whatever cultural trends. But what we're talking about is eternal and stunning, and that is already in you. And so it's almost like a rest in who God has created you to be, knowing that his light, his life, his goodness, his image is already there. And so I would invite them to see that, to ask God maybe to help them see it. And like may we be awakened, may that person be awakened to the light and life of God that is already in them and has already made them beautiful.
Mm, I love that so much. That's really, I do just feel there's such a peace about that, just
Mhm.
acknowledging what's already there.
Mm,
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I have been so encouraged and
mm,
inspired by hearing your story and just following your journey.
mm.
So where can everybody else find you, connect with you, get a copy of your book, listen to the podcast, everything?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the podcast again is Impossible Beauty. And so if you head to impossible-beauty.com, You'll find the podcast there, but you'll also find some blog entries that I've written about some of these ideas. There's a link to buy the book there. Again, the book is called Soul Deep Beauty, Fighting for Our True Worth in a World Demanding Flawless. So you can get it on the Impossible Beauty website, or you can head to Amazon, bakerbookhouse.com, Target. I think it's at like most of the places, Barnes & Noble.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yes. You guys definitely need to follow Melissa. Follow along, listen to the podcast. I promise you, you will walk away encouraged and inspired and empowered every single time.
Mm.
Thank you so much for being here, Melissa. I appreciate you sharing your time, sharing your story, and just everything you're doing to help women redefine beauty for themselves and get free from all the shame.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune into another episode of the Byword Show. I love having you here, and I'm so thankful for your support. Don't forget to share a screenshot of this episode to let me know you were here. I can't wait to talk again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come hang out with me on Instagram, and remember, I am cheering you on.